From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Hi, everyone. My name is Betsy Peterson, and I'm the director of the American Folklife Center. And on behalf of the staff at the center, the librarian, and everyone here, we're so thrilled that you're here today. This is a very special event, and I'm really excited about the panel coming up. This is part of an event called Dancing Irene, Reimagining Alan Lomax's Choriometrics Project. We're delighted to be co-sponsoring today's symposium with the University of Maryland School of Theater, Dance, and Performance Studies. And today's conversation is the first part of a very important landmark 3-day conference that's coming up on choriometrics. The remaining 2 days are going to be held free of charge to anyone, the public, everyone, at the University of Maryland. So please talk to Karen Cohen-Bradley if you're interested in attending and finding out more about it. But please join everyone there if you don't have any plans. I'm certainly going to be there. The event today is also part of an ongoing lecture series that we have, the Benjamin A. Botkin Lecture Series. And this is a series that allows the American Folklife Center to present the latest and best scholarship in folklore, ethnomusicology, cultural studies, and the like. And it accomplishes two purposes, with the first sharing all of this great research and information, but it also allows us to enrich our own collections. And in fact, the conversation that we're going to be privy to over the next couple of hours will be recorded and put online eventually, available to people throughout the world and to people in future generations. So with that said, let me ask you if you have any electronic devices at the moment, any phones and the like, if you could please turn them off, or you will be part of our archive. And finally, this is like a perfect trifecta of activity going on. But today's event is not only one of the Benjamin Botkin lectures, it's also part of a year-long celebration of Alan Lomax on the occasion of the centennial of his birth. So happy birthday. The Alan Lomax collection is one of AFC's largest, most prestigious, and most celebrated collections. And although Lomax most of his work is well known, certainly, particularly the Anglo-American and African-American work, there are other aspects of his collecting and his scholarship that is not as well known. And this is particularly true of his work on dance and dance theory, to which he devoted a significant portion of his later career. His study of dance is formalized, culturally conditioned, communicative behavior based on researching the diversity of dance and its relationship to different cultures throughout the world, a field which he christened choriometrics has been unduly neglected. As was true with so many important researchers, Alan Lomax did not work in isolation, and indeed, throughout his entire career, he worked with a range of collaborators and colleagues. And choriometrics is no different. Lomax launched the enormous Choriometrics project in 1965 with collaborators Irmgard Barteniev and Faustine Paulet. We are delighted to have Faustine Paulet here with us today for today's discussion, as well as Choriometrics project researcher Miriam Lobel. But before I turn the proceedings over to Karen Cohen-Bradley, who is the director of Graduate Studies in Dance, the chair of Graduate Studies in Dance School of Theater, Dance, and Performance Studies at the University of Maryland, and the lead organizer of this conference, I just want to thank you again for all coming and invite you to join in the conversation after when we open things to the public, and to please stay for the reception afterwards. So without further ado, I will turn things over to Karen Cohn-Bradley, who is right there.
Welcome, everybody. It's thrilling for me to see these faces here coming from so far away. I am here to do the thank yous. I have so many people to thank. I made a list. First of all, of course, the American Folklife Center, the Library of Congress, particularly Betsy Peterson, Todd Harvey, Nancy Gross, Thea, everybody who's been so helpful here. The School of Theater, Dance, and Performance Studies, who, for whatever reason, awarded me the Dorothy G. Madden Professorship of Dance, which allowed me to play in a sandbox that I never could have afforded otherwise, and to bring everybody together for this conference. I'm so grateful for the opportunities. The Association for Cultural Equity, particularly Anna Lomax Wood, who we've been having a conversation for some years now about how to get this collection out there, digitized, etc. I'm so grateful to your partnership, for your partnership and your help. And the Laban Institute of Movement Studies in New York, which I also hang out at. And I just wanted to do a shout out to my students who have been working on this project. Drew Barker, can you raise your hand? Christina Pavana Lapulu, Suggest Samantalake, Megan Bowden, Sinclair Emogen, Kate Spanos. These are some of the graduate students from the University of Maryland who've become engaged with this work so deeply and fully and made it their own, and I feel grateful for the future of it because of them. And finally, my colleague, Miriam Phillips. When she first came to the University of Maryland, we decided one day on a lark to go down and find the Coriometrics materials. We didn't really know where they were, but we came on a subway and we came on down. We went to the Smithsonian first, and they said, no, it's over at the Library of Congress. And we walked in, and there was Todd Harvey. And so began this, 6-7 years of conversation about how we could do something with this material. And today is a launch of a new stage of that. So welcome, everybody. Thank you, Miriam. And I turn it over to you.
And last but not least, I would like to thank Karen Bradley, who's been the extraordinary visionary behind this project and incredibly perseverant to make even getting this far happen. And we have a lot of work to do, and she's been incredible. So thank you, Karen. And again, thanks to all of you, Forrestine, Mary, and everyone, because I know people have been coming from near and far. So we really appreciate that. Karen left out one tidbit of a story. Along with the time where we came down here on a whim, it seemed that it correlated with the time when at the Laban Institute, some of the original files of Irmgard were also discovered in a storage unit. Where in Brooklyn. And so it was this kind of synchronistic timing. And so it just kind of lit the fire to progress with this project. So I thought that we would spend half the time. I have some questions I've thought about before, just discussing with you, and then open it up to our esteemed guests for comments, questions, ideas. How does that sound?
Sounds fine.
Could you each start with telling us briefly how you got involved in the Coriometrics project? How did you meet Alan Lomax?
I think I'll start since I started. Oh, wow. Alan Lomax was a student of Ray Birdwhistle. And when Alan had already developed the countermetric study. There were certain questions that he had that he felt he wasn't finding the answers for in the countermetric study. So he spoke with Ray Birdwhistle, about this. Ray Birdwhistle is the founder of Kinesics. And Birdwhistle said, well, dance is a more fundamental, more primary mode of expression than song. And if you're going to find out the answers to the questions that you're interested in, you're going to need to look at dance. And Birdwhistle recommended Laban's analysis as probably the most appropriate analysis for discovering the kinds of answers to the questions that Alan had. So Alan called up, I guess at that point it was the Dance Notation Bureau, and invited Irmgard. And as a dancer, Irmgard asked me to come along with her in this interview with Alan to begin to discuss whether we thought we could help him develop a system for looking at movement cross-culturally. It turned out to be an extremely interesting experience at that time, because we were looking from the Laban analysis point of view pretty much at individuals. And this was not going to answer the questions that Alan was interested in. And I can remember that one of the very first films that we looked at were the Georgia Sea Island Dancers. And Irmgard and I just had a ball. We had such fun getting the individual differences of every one of the performers. And we were very excited about this. And we bring it in to conference with Alan, and we start talking about all these differences. And Alan sort of sits back, and he said something like, well, that doesn't tell us anything. I mean, we were just totally off the mark. And that began a whole education for both Irmgard and me in looking at movement in terms of different levels. And that if we're going to look cross-culturally, we are not looking at individual differences. We are not looking at individual, God, I was just reading something out there which was showing the effort shape, well, not the shape because that wasn't in there yet, the effort graph and changes from, free flow into bound flow light, back to free flow. Well, this is not going to give you any information that's going to enlighten you about cultures, all right? So that began this whole education of looking at the whole world of dance. And one of the first things we did was collect together reels that had all of the areas represented, and looking at that and beginning to find patterns. And so the early coding system came out of that work of looking across all the different areas and finding a way of adapting the Laban work to the cultural level. That was work that proceeded probably up until 1970, so it was very based in Laban's work. 1970, Irmgard went back to the Dance Notation Bureau and began teaching there, and Alan and I continued working on the coding system. And that was when we began looking at and brought into the system patterns of social organization, and also such parameters as palm presentation, use of foot. So we began to look at how the body was used generally. So not specifically oriented to the Laban background, but clearly influenced by the sensitivity that a trained person develops by going through that kind of training. So that's the beginning.
Thank you.
Okay.
answers bring up more questions, but let's hear from Mary.
Well, I started out as an anthropology student in college, and I took a year abroad, and I went to Greece, and I was planning to write something about my experience in Greece, which was transformative. But when I was there, I realized that I couldn't possibly capture what I wanted to say about Greek culture and Greek life in writing, and so I decided I should try to pursue ethnographic film. So I came back to New York, and I wanted to work in ethnographic film, and I called the only person I had heard of whom I thought could help me. I called Margaret Mead. And I said, I would like to volunteer as an intern and work with someone who's doing ethnographic film. And she said, well, you should really call Alan Lomax, because he is doing an amazing project about world dance. And I was so excited because dance was also very important to me. I had been studying modern dance my whole life, and as well as in college. And I called Alan and I said I was interested in being an intern, and he said, okay, come on up. So I went there, and I guess in the beginning I was working to help procure the films from all over the world and to just keep an organized catalog of the films from all over the world, and gradually began working on the coding system and learning with Forrestine how to look at films from all over the world. And I thought I would show you just a very short, it's a 6-minute film that gives an idea of the influence that choreometrics played out in my life since the time I was there. I was there from 1971 to 1994, on and off, because like many of you, I was always torn between researching dance and being a dance practitioner. So there were times when I went back more full-time to studying and performing dance. And I will just bring up a few highlights of the choreometric system when I show you this material. I didn't shoot any of it, but these are all performances that I've seen. So it starts out, the first is a performance that I saw at Lincoln Center a couple of years ago. These are Manganyar Seduction. They're Rajasthani musicians. And what stood out for this, you'll see in a minute, is that the musicians are really dancing as they sing and as they play their instruments. And as soon as we zoom into the close-up, one of the things that we looked at in choreometrics is the use of the body, and in these particular cultures, the use of the head, the eyes, and the hands is so unique and so pronounced. And of course, the rhythmic timing also. So this is an example of musicians dancing. This is Lakshmi Knight, Balasaraswati's daughter. After I was working with Alan's project for a couple of years, and I fell in love with dance from all over the world. I was so excited to see people dancing in any culture. And I went back to finish my degree at University of Wisconsin, and I heard that Lakshmi's mother, T. Balasaraswati, was coming to teach in Seattle that summer. And I just couldn't believe that she was coming to teach and we would have an opportunity to study with her. So I began studying and working with them for many years. But again, Lakshmi's dancing illustrates so many things that are characteristic of that region: her use of facial expression, her eyes, her use of hands, her interpretive gestures. And of course, the relationship, again, to the music. You don't see it here, but there are live musicians sitting right next to her in the room. Fast forward. From time to time, my daughter says, "Oh, Mom, did you see this video?"
Gangnam Style.
So this is Gangnam Style, which I guess is one of the most watched videos on YouTube ever. It's a Korean hip-hop song. But if you look at the use of the body, what I knew from choreometrics is that single unit and multi-unit torso, and single unit torso. Really more typically a multi-unit dance style in hip-hop or in African music. What I found is, having been at Choreometrics, I can't help but analyze everything through that lens. So this is another music video, which Pharrell, many of you probably know. And he's included so many people on the street dancing, and you really see the difference in performance style between some of the Caucasian performers, African American, and the use of the multi-unit torso, which is a strong presence, again, in African culture. We also look at the excessiveness of flow of energy through the body and through the torso. Again, you see For a number of years, I worked as a presenter of traditional music and dance. I was working in Union City, New Jersey, and the community there is largely Latino, so I worked with many Latin American musicians and dancers. And this is Roberto Cepeda doing bomba. But again, you see so much African influence in the way he moves, in the sliding of his feet across the earth, in the trembling, in his bent forward posture, in the successive moves in his arms. Lucky they showed that on Sesame Street. One last music video. Rihanna, Kanye West, and Paul McCartney. This is a song that came out earlier this year. And when I saw this video where Paul McCartney are really being subdued in the way they're moving and contained, single unit torso. But Kanye, 3 or 4 times in this, drops to the ground. Such emphatic movement, and all I could think about was the Funky Bushman that we worked with at the Lomax office so repeatedly. Anne and I were talking because most of them, well, I'll go back to that later, but this is the last piece since this is Dancing Irini, and I spent a lot of time in Greece, and I really loved being in Greece. This is the Greek parade in New York City every year around March 25th. They have a parade, and these are the Evzones from Athens who are marching, emphasizing their synchrony and the use of their feet, the complex stepping, pointed feet. They're not doing complex stepping right here, but they're lifting their legs. And last but not least, this is Kasapiko in Greece, and again, this is what got me to Alan's office in the first place. My enchantment, I guess, with Greek culture, and dancing was such a part of life there. I think almost every single night that I was there in the evening, you would see people in the tavernas just getting up to dance spontaneously, and they enjoyed it so much, and everybody enjoyed it. And so I guess this just reflects, again, a wonderful approach to dance that is such an important part of people's social lives, and choreometrics analysis we can do on the synchrony and the stepping and foot crossing and the held torsos.
Plow agriculture.
Plow agriculture. So Dancing Irini, I'm not sure where that is going, but I'm really grateful to Karen for thinking of the idea that dance could work to help foster more peaceful interactions. Irini means peace in Greek.
Thank you. Continuing to reflect on the early days, when you both met Alan, how did he describe the project to you? I mean, what did you understand this project to be about?
Did he describe it to you?
What I was going to say is Alan lived and breathed the project. He was so excited about every single bit of the research and every finding and every can of film that came in from far and wide all across the world. His enthusiasm was so contagious and infectious, and he talked about it all the time. So he didn't really have to describe it because he was enthusing about it constantly. And he was determined and committed, and he never let anything interfere with him pursuing it and trying to fill it out to be as representative as possible.
I'm trying to remember how he first described it to Irmgard and me. Alan had a passionate love for what he called the good and the beautiful. And I don't really remember his description, but what comes to me was the sense of his love for the performances of different cultures around the whole world. He had such a deep respect for the integrity of the different cultures that he was viewing, that he had been listening to. And I think what really stayed with me and what interested me so much as I began to view the material was from him, certainly, his valuing of each style, of not having a, say, preference for the Western European style of which he came, but that kind of broad appreciation. And I think that's part of what captured me and made me want to do the study. It touched something very deep in me as I watched the dancers and the dances going by. I experienced such a sense of the presence of real humanity and the expression of a whole life way of a people through their performance style, through their dance. And I can remember being caught by driving down, what was it, First Avenue or something, and seeing up in a window a group of children who were studying dance. And they had scarves, and they were swinging the scarves like this. And it was like, I saw that, and then it took me all the way back into looking at some of the early English dances and such, where they were swirling scarves. And it was like the feeling of continuity, that what we're doing today is so related to years and years and years of people living together, that it's not just, quote, dance, but it really epitomizes those things that were important for the lives of those people way back. And that's part of my heritage, I saw. It's like, here I had been studying this, and I had no sense of the history. And this gave me not only a sense of my own history, but my history in perspective of the whole world. And so that's the best answer I can give you to that question of, that's what it exuded from Alan, this deep respect and love of the beauty, the aesthetic beauty of all performances, of all cultures.
It's bringing up for me a little bit of, what was Alan searching for? What was, and maybe Anna, you can also talk about this a little bit later. Like, what was he looking for? And then he brought you on. Was there already some kind of inkling of a theory or cultural patterns, or it was more just like looking? Let's see.
He had done the whole cantometric study
before, so there was already that.
Oh, he had that model, and he had questions that he had not yet been able to answer. So it was Birdwhistle saying, "Oh, you've got to look at dance," and then some of those questions had to do with energy. All right. That he wasn't seeing the distributions that he was curious about, and the song style wasn't bringing those up. So he had the whole experience of using the George Murdoch area files, and so he was able to organize as we got materials. He had a very clear idea. He wanted a full world sample of dance style in order for us to develop a system that would be comprehensive and that would be a level of observation that would be applicable at the cross-cultural level. So there were a lot of things like, when we started, and it just wasn't appropriate, the individual differences. But it was also true that there were cultural definers that also would not be applicable cross-culturally. So he had a very clear idea as we were looking, and we were looking for patterns, that Irmgard and I immerse ourselves really in all of the areas and begin to get to know something about them, so that we could begin to see patterns that characterized a certain group, but was that of a particular kind of phenomena that made some sense if you use that particular, so those parameters on different cultures, on all the different areas. Was it going to provide some kind of an interesting distinction? So his guidance was, essential in the development of the system, to keep it at the cross-cultural level.
I think he wanted to look at the beauty of human expression, which we've all been saying that he loved and appreciated so much, and not to have any kind of hierarchical analysis. And that was really the beauty of choreometrics also, that it was just a way of looking at all different forms of dance with some parameters that you could use to hang on to, but there was no one style. Certainly ballet was not considered to be, the ultimate aspiration of every dancer in the world. And that was also what made it so appealing, that it was very open and accepting of every dance style.
Great, thank you. Could you speak a little bit about what some of your working conditions were? Like, take us back to, you showed up at work. What did you do? How did these coding sheets develop and get altered? Just take us through what. It sounds like probably there wasn't a typical day, but maybe there was.
Well, it was a great day when Mary came on. We needed help, or I did certainly at that point. 98th and Broadway. That was the very first 12th floor, and it was an apartment that had been turned into offices, and one room was for the countermetric. All of the materials for countermetrics, for the song materials. Alan had a large office where he spent, I don't know how many hours, at least 28 hours every day, of going through all of the grant writing. Alan did all the grant writing. He interviewed people. He made contacts with people in order to get films and to increase the sample. He was the person who was responsible for determining the whole sample, and was it going to be adequate? And so he worked in conjunction with Connie Ahrensberg, would come frequently. He had a statistician. Remember the statistician's name? Well, there was another one too. Ed Erickson was there. Yes, statistician. Ed Erickson was there. Norman Berkowitz was there. Roswell Rudd was there, doing the coding for the countermetrics. And Irmgard Hirsch.
Daddy Dan.
Well, these people, they came later. They were not a part of this initial. It was Irmgard and me, and we had marathons of looking at footage. I used to, at night, I would dream seeing these dances, and I would enter into them and dance with them, you know.
I'm sorry, did you watch the films together with Irmgard and then
Well, later
with,
Mary came.
Right.
Yeah. This is the first.
But did you watch together? Did you watch separately?
Oh, no, we watched together.
And
Alan,
were
too.
you filling out coding sheets?
No, because
as
we
you
didn't have
went?
coding sheets yet.
Oh, so this was early,
This was
pre the
before
coding. You were just
pre-coding. We were
looking
just
at the-
observing and looking and making notes, and then, you know, educating ourselves about the different levels of observation. All right? That was a big part of the early process. And we spent hours observing. I mean, I had at home, I would even take things at home. And I had a machine so I could run things backward and forward. And I started dreaming. I'd watch cars going across the street, and then I'd watch them backing up. And then I'd watch them go again. You know, it was like the whole process. It felt like pregnancy. Like I was stretching, you know, to take in this whole world of dance. It was an amazing experience. And it was out of that gradually we developed the coding system. And the coding system developed sort of by increments. In the early years, it was more organized by Laban principles. So we were looking at dimensionality, right? We did look at 1 and 2 units of the body, and you know, we looked at various qualities of, say, transition in space, things which were more related to the Laban work. And that was like the first coding system, and we went through that and coded. So it was a gradual development. Norman Berkowitz would then take the coding sheets, and they were transcribed onto cards, which Todd was showing me. The cards are even here. Then they were taken to the Columbia computer room, that big, big room. Then, you know, we would get back these sheets, and Alan would spend hours looking through these numbers, so excited whenever one of these things, and I would look at it, and I was like, oh my God. You know, there was just piles of numbers, and he was so good at determining pattern because he had the whole ethnography in his head. And so he could immediately see if pattern was coming out of particular parameters. And that helped shape the development of the coding system. That was one of the important pieces. After Irmgard left, then we began developing other aspects of the coding system, the social organization and body presentation and such. And at that point, I was handling all of getting the films and bringing them in and selecting the sections, and this is finally when Mary arrived. It was marvelous to have another person there to begin training to do some of the coding and to handle, because you were starting to handle this, because it was one enormous job was collecting all the material. And that was when I was in the archive just earlier and saw, you know, my hand notes on, you know, have we called so-and-so and ask Alan if we can spend $150 on this particular film from so-and-so, you know, and seeing, it was a massive job collecting this footage, really was. Yes. And we had to go through it, and then we had to select out the sections that were most relevant. And the other thing that shaped the coding system that was so fascinating was it was to find characteristics which you look at a small piece of it and you've got it. In other words, so you're not having to look and you detail this and, you know, and then come up with a code. But it has to be conveyed immediately, because what we're looking at basically is how cultures represent themselves. We're looking at cultural identity. And cultural identity has got to be there right away. You come up to a person and you recognize, am I of this culture? That takes care of a lot of things, and then you can go on with other kind of detailed interaction. So we had to shape our way of looking to capture cultural identity. So it's an interesting thing. One of the things that I've noticed that certain people have talked about is, because we were also looking at everyday movement, because we wanted to see the correlations between the dance style and movement. And there's a real, one aspect of the relationship between the dance style and the work is that basically, this is what people are doing. The neurological patterns are developed from very early on, and those are brought forward in the dance. But there's another aspect to it, and this is identity, and it's cultural identity. And that sets the motion for interaction and patterns of interaction, right? So we were looking, can you grasp those things, like sort of immediately, and in ways that can be taught easily? Because we did consensus studies. Did we do those when had you come, or had we already done some of the? We had already done those. Okay, we were doing consensus studies. So we would bring in students and teach them some of the lines and see, were the parameters that we had developed, not only did they provide interesting information in terms of the distribution of cultures, but were these lines teachable and easily teachable? Could other people besides trained people see them? And that also determined what we kept in the system.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Okay.
To ask you more of my questions another time, but
Yes.
I'm going to keep the conversation moving.
Yes.
Mary, tell us a little bit about when you came on board. My understanding, were not formally trained, like certified Laban movement system, but Forrestine and Irmgard
No, I wasn't trained in
sort of
Laban.
trained you in that sense. So could tell us a little bit about that, and what was your role?
Mm-hmm. I think when I first came in, I was helping in a big way with the films. I remember some of the films came in, like we got film from Prince Peter of Greece in Denmark in a big can, wrapped in his pajamas, all stitched together by hand. And this was a time when we couldn't send things over the internet. We got film from India that was in burlap, and also, in a container that was stitched by hand. So whatever we got, we were very careful to log, and we had a pretty complicated system. We made notes about what was on the film. A lot of times there was dance, but there was other material as well, and we had all kinds of notebooks where we made notes about that. We had file cards where we also put that information. And then we took a lot of the film down to a lab in Midtown and had copies made, work copies of the dance sections that we knew that we were going to be coding. So there was a lot of processing in that way. And then when we started putting together the Choreometrics films, I also spent a lot of time. I was the assistant editor on those, with trying to figure out what clips we were going to use, and using, Steenbeck to cut it frame by frame, and syncing up the music. So there was quite a bit of film work going on in conjunction with the dance coding. As I was there, Forrestine taught me the coding system, and we worked together a lot for long hours every day, and it was just fascinating. And we would discuss what we saw and whether or not we were both seeing the same thing, and then what the findings were that were coming out of it. But Alan also was doing his own larger analysis of the findings cross-culturally, I think based on his Cantometrics findings.
Tell us a little bit about the findings. I mean, I'm really curious, can you recall an aha moment? I'm sure you had many aha moments. Or, well, I'll let you ponder that one.
Yeah. Oh, there were, it was such an education in anthropology. Coming at it from the perspective of a dancer, choreographer. It was a constant source of almost like wonder that the use of the body or the use of space related in, say, some instances to technology, so that, I mean, the one-dimensionality being related to a particular kind of tool use, that if you're using, say, a wooden tool, if you were to use it with a curve, you would probably break it. And so watching Australian Aborigines working on say a tree with a wooden tool, and the kind of patience and the kind of repetition that was required with those reversing one-dimensional movements, right? In contrast to where they had metal and seeing the sweep of the metal blade cutting, the harvest, and seeing how this really did shape the dance. I think it's just really seeing the significance of that was so impressive. And I mean, the fact that, that would be one level of aha. But another level of aha would be to see the distribution of a particular pattern, say of the one-unit torso, and to see that across the whole Pacific, and see it going all the way down, right, into the tip of South America. Or to see that in the use of horses, it's not only in the use of the stirrup, but where there's no stirrups, where it's basically at the tip of Patagonia, I think it's the Mapuche. Interesting how things start coming back. I think it's the Mapuche Indians who dance on half-toe. They are a horse culture that was so indomitable that I think they were maybe one of the one cultures that was never taken over, was never by Europeans. And they dance on half-toe. American Indians, not the full flat, because of the importance of horses. And you take that and you think of the Georgian dancers who are dancing on toe. So there's something besides the actual movement patterns that are being conveyed through the dance, but there is an identity with horses and the meaningfulness of horses, where the use of the foot is like the use of a hoof, right? So it shows something more about the complexity that we're looking at when we're looking at a dance. Because it isn't just that these are the movement patterns that the culture survived on, but these are the identifications that these people made with those things that are important in their lives, which adds another level of richness. And it adds another level of richness for dance teachers to understand when you're working, what's the cultural identity like for the person you're teaching and you're working with? And how do you teach, how do you use this choreometrics, all right, in order to help people really experience a shift in identity, a shift in cultural identity? What can you do through movement, which means drawing on your other kinds of backgrounds in movement, all right, to bring to the dancers so that they can actually experience, if you start working through the feet, you're going to get something in the upper body that if you go directly to the upper body, you're not going to get. Because so often in what we see, say, why it looks so different to see the early Caucasians doing multi-unit style and why it looks so stiff, look at their feet, all right? You've got to work through the feet. You have the whole barefootness, all right, that goes along with the multi-unit style. And it's because the flow comes from the foot all the way up. And if you put a shoe on that foot and you don't teach that person, no, you can't go even if you're barefoot, as if you have shoes on, you're not going to get the fluidity in the multi-unitness of the body. I think I may have gone off a little bit from that, but
well,
the question.
It was sure interesting. Let me ask Marie something about the work process. And then I have 2 more questions, and I want to open it up. So you're observing. You're doing when the coding sheets came on. You're doing the coding sheets. You're giving them back to Alan. They're going in the mainframe, getting these numbers spit it out. Well, just that process was how you were sort of feeding things into Alan, what he was getting, and then the interpretations that started coming back to you.
We were all in the same small office, so we would code a few things, or
would he code with
no,
you?
Sometimes he sat there, but then we would go and discuss with him something, or give him a stack of coding sheets that we had just done, and we would talk about it, and then he was really giving it to, after we got a certain amount done, then feeding it to whoever was analyzing it through the computer, through the global jukebox. The last time that I was working there, he was trying to accumulate a certain number of codings, and also to reduce the number of parameters on the coding sheet, so that maybe there could be 40 different parameters instead of the 4 pages of codes that we were putting in for a while. He was trying to, and working with you also, Forresty, and trying to find what were the most essential characteristics that could speak to the essence of the dance, of the use of the body, the social organization, the relationship to the audience, the dynamics of the movement. What could be the minimum number of variables that you could look at and still get something meaningful from it?
He was actually doing factor analysis work on that. All right, so it wasn't just by, looking and saying, well, let's put this together, but he would do factor analysis, and that would bring pieces together. And sometimes what would then happen is then we would take that factor analysis and actually, out of that, sharpen the coding parameter. And so that became a part of the progression of the coding sheet, so that there was a constant interplay of the sort of the statistics and the technology with the observations shaping the coding system.
Now, at some point, there was some interpretations of all the patterns that were started to be made, and once I guess it was the films started coming out and publications, there were some controversies that came up with the project. Did they come into your conversations? And we'll be, that'll be coming up over the next few days, I think, in some conversations. But did those come back to you in the conversations?
I could say something, because at the time that I started working there, the field of anthropology was changing, and anthropologists felt that they really needed to specialize very much in one specific culture and perhaps in one specific village within one country. And so I always felt there was a lot of resentment. I don't know if that's the right word, but people didn't like the fact that Alan thought that he could look in an objective way at a bigger global picture. And it really didn't, from what I heard, it really didn't even have anything to do with knowledge of what the project was actually doing. It was the fact that he was saying that it was possible to look at the world of dance in a global way. And I disagreed with the people who felt that it was not possible. I think his intellectual capacity and his vision and his thoroughness it was just so huge that he could do something, and I think he gave all of us tools that we can utilize to help us all understand each other and the ways that we organize socially in different types of groups, and the way that we move and the way we use our bodies. But I think it was very much a trend of the times. And, you know, in all kinds of science, of course, there were people who, it was a time when feminism was going full force. So if there was any comment in any of the Coriometrics material that, I don't know, reflected any kind of male attitude towards women, people always just like made a beeline towards that comment and completely ignored the rest of the information that was being presented. But so I'm not sure if that's what you mean by controversy, but I think those were the two biggest areas that I was aware of, and I felt that the project was so valuable, and I respected people's criticisms for what they were saying, but especially the first one that I mentioned, where anthropology as a field was, you know, it was the whole time of being so embarrassed about American colonialism, and how dare we presume to be able to say anything about anybody else in the world, and who are we to go somewhere and tell people that this is what you're thinking and feeling. So everybody was just trying to work on a very micro level and report every little thing that was going on in a specific cultural environment, and Alan was in the midst of working in a more global way.
Right. I mean, some of the commentary was about the decontextualization, or some of the interpretation sort of that was about a particular group representing a whole culture. So yeah, just did that come into your conversations at all?
Well, it did, certainly, with Alan. I mean, we did discuss that. But the thing is, any dance performance, you can look at it from so many different levels. There's such richness there. And I think people felt that richness was getting slighted. I remember talking with someone, and it was about, what group was it? Whether it was East European dance, I don't know. They were talking about, this is an exaggeration because I don't remember the number, but anyway, something like, well, there's 600 different steps, and you're calling this step style and stepping, you know, but there are 600 different ones, and they have different, you know, they're done in different occasions and by different people, and you know, and to explain that is beautiful and it's very interesting, but that's not the level that we're observing on. We're looking at the difference between this kind of stepping pattern that crosses like this and a stepping pattern which maybe just walks forward and never crosses, all right? And that makes it an important distinction at this broad level. But it certainly leaves out a wealth of beautiful information, and important information about the culture. It's just that wasn't the level we were looking at. So there was not an understanding frequently, I think, about that. And possibly it wasn't presented, you know, I could see that it could be really interesting to show the simplicity of what the Coriometrics level was getting at, then have someone from the culture show the amount of diversity within that, so that both could be shown to people at the, you know, in continuity, so that it's like, it's not for lack of appreciation of that, but if you get caught in that, it was like when Irmgard and I first got caught in individual differences. They're very interesting if you're going to do a psychological study of those people. But it's not going to tell you anything about where they are in the world.
Well, it kind of gets into my last question before opening it up, which is, what are your hopes and dreams for this project? What would you love to see happen?
Want to talk to that first?
I'm just so thrilled that Karen and you and the University of Maryland are really interested in bringing this material back to the attention of students and young people. And also thrilled that the material is housed so beautifully at the Library of Congress. Your archive is mind-blowing, really, to see how well everything has been organized and contained. So my hope was always that more people would benefit from Choreometrics and would appreciate it and have a chance to look at all of that amazing film footage of dance all over the world. My fear in the 70s was always that all of the individuality in different cultures was going to get eradicated, and we would all end up moving in a similar way, and maybe we'll all end up just thumbing on our phones. But I think that Choreometrics can really open up the horizon again to everybody, to dancers and non-dancers, about what the range of possibility is and that exists in human movement.
Well, I too really appreciate what's being done here and what's being done by Karen, what's being done by the archivists here. I was extremely touched by going down to the archive and seeing the incredibly sensitive, intelligent, loving kind of work that's been done here. I think what's touching me now is these young students that I'm starting to meet. And I'm eager to talk to them about what's catching them at this time. What's interesting them? Why are they doing this? What does it capture in them that they're devoting themselves to this? What have they discovered here? There's something about the enthusiasm that touches me. I feel it's bringing this work. It's bringing bringing the aliveness to this work that is touching something in me in terms of vision, right? Where are they going to go with it, and what are they going to do, and how is it going to spread? What is the personal meaning in their lives, and how can they, how are they going to share that and touch other people? There's, Alan's vision of the good and the beautiful is something that I hold dear, because of the beauty of this performance is not just the beauty of performance, but it's the beauty of different life ways. It's about appreciation of how people live and how they communicate, how do they interact, how do they make contact. I think there's something here in how they make contact and how they relate that can be an experiential lesson for more and more people. That there are different ways of being with others. And to begin to look at that, there's something about that when we see this whole world of movement, we can also begin to see ourselves more clearly. We can begin to maybe make more choices about ourselves when we see ourselves in perspective. Because we assume so much because that's just the way things are for us. Well, we don't recognize what has shaped that, right? And I think recognizing what shaped that and what has shaped others gives us more respect for other people. So I think there's a whole thing here about spreading respect throughout, right, the world that can come through the arts, through song, through dance, when one sees it as these are living patterns. These are patterns that shape the lives of people.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can I add one little coda to what you said? We look at all this footage that we have in the Global Jukebox, and it's from such far and wide places. But I remember Alan really took advantage of wherever he was to appreciate the different ways that people express themselves in song and in speaking. And he once said to me, you know, I could do my best research right now when I take a cab ride. He said, you can't believe I spend the entire ride interviewing the cab driver and asking him what kind of music he likes to listen to, and having him sing a song for me, and having him tell me about his community here in the United States. So he was constantly aware and alert of who was around him and what they had to offer artistically. And I think that's something that also we can all appreciate in our own lives by being more open to that.
Absolutely.
Which is following upon what Forrestine and Miriam just said, and that is that I think the dances that they studied represent, and they're not the only examples, of course, but kind of the classical canon of the world, right? And in this era of mixing everything and taking a little bit from here and a little bit from there and saying, oh, isn't it wonderful, we can put it all together. Oftentimes we're doing it without understanding what the original is all about. Now, when we study art, the fine arts, the visual arts and classical music and so on, do we not have to go through years of training for this and years of study of all the background and so on? But somehow this sort of traditional, quote unquote, forms of music and dance don't get that. I think they are now more and more. There are people who are actually learning these styles, but that's not mainly what's happening, and I think that should be part of our consciousness in thinking about them, that at least they deserve to be respected very much in their own right, first and foremost, because that's the only way we can to really understand and inspect all of the elements of what they are and the totality of what they are and where they come from. Otherwise, we're just sort of grazing superficially and picking off little pieces of things, and we don't want to do that.
Mm-hmm. Anna Lomax Wood. What questions, comments do you have, Paul? There's a microphone coming, so hang on.
Hi, thank you. I had a question, or a series of questions actually, all related to the procuring of the films themselves, because it seemed like there's a great difference, completely understandably, in the type of films that were used, that you were analyzing. Some seemed ethnographic, some were documentaries, some seemed like they were folk performances, where others might have been, you know, a part of a festival or a tradition. So how did you identify the films? Did you rely on people overseas to make selections of those films? I loved hearing how some came, how they arrived. But how did the conditions of their production figure into the way you analyzed them, or into the way Alan actually interpreted them afterwards? In other words, because there's a disparity in the films, which I actually think can make for a richer interpretation, actually, but how did that actually play into the way that, or did it, into the interpretation?
The interpretation was not of the films, all right? The interpretation came out of the data, all right? And out of the having the full sample, okay? That's where the interpretation came from. And much of that was not, I wouldn't call interpretation. That was relaying the coming together of the different lines, what they did in terms of distributions, right? So, can't think what the right word is at the moment, but it's not interpretation. It was really more exposition of the findings rather than, quote, interpretation. In other words, this particular quality of movement is found in this particular distribution around the world. And that's the first film that we did, which was The Dance in Human History, shows that graphically, all right? I tried to minimize interpretation and stick with what is the distribution and the potential significance of that distribution in relationship to the Murdoch sample and other things in anthropology that have been looked at and where the distribution had been studied. As far as the search for films, the criteria was what geographic region did they illustrate? Was there enough footage that we could get a coding from it? Did the camera person stick with some of the European stuff so that we only had headshots and couldn't tell much of anything else? Did they go beyond the traditional 8-second shot so that we could see what was happening without cuts constantly? All right? So we looked for anything we could find from the different cultures. And sometimes that would be raw footage. Sometimes it would be completed films. Sometimes it would be at the festival. But when you're looking at the cross-cultural level, you're looking at something which we were trying to develop where you can capture that identity in a fairly short period of time. So that we had to rule out a lot of interesting measures that would have required looking at a whole dance. All right? So we couldn't look at choreographic structure usually because we didn't have it. So we were limited to those things that we could discover within a few minutes of footage. And we would get that footage from anywhere, from, whether it was a folk performance. We would try to find examples that were done by ethnographers, anthropologists, et cetera, so that there was a certain integrity in the footage that we chose to work from. If something was highly westernized, we would tend not to use it. All right? So does that answer your question somewhat?
It does. But could I, even more specifically, when you were looking, it's useful to see that the vetting process had more to do with the quality of the film, not necessarily where it came from or what.
Well, no, it very much where it came from, because Alan was working to get a full sample.
Right.
All right? So where it came from, yes.
Okay.
And we had to search far and wide sometimes to find material to illustrate certain cultures. All right? So that was there very much too.
So you weren't necessarily seeking specific examples of particular dances, but you were reaching out to people who might have access to footage of that they knew of.
Representing that region. Yeah, rather than a specific dance. Because if we were working at the right level, it should pertain pretty much across dances. That style should be visible to enough of an extent across different dances. That's what I was talking about. Well, one person was saying, well, there's 600 different dancers or different steps. How can you possibly be, Well, because it's going to be very different from what's done in Southeast Asia and what's done in South America or et cetera, okay?
Great,
Yep.
Thank you.
We did have an ethnographic film specialist, Emily de Brigard, came in at one point. This was after you had already collected a lot of film, but she was very familiar with a lot of anthropologists who were out in the field at that time. And so, we wrote letters to people wherever they were working, and very often they were very willing to bring their material in and share it.
Oh, and they're major collections. I mean, Penn State had an incredible collection. I mean, so we really researched the different archives that existed, and we traveled. I mean, I spent hours and days in the basement of the Musée de l'Homme cranking out footage, and looking at this size and making selections. So we went all over looking for stuff, and found wonderful treasure troves. I mean, I did something at the University of Phoenix, and just talking to somebody in the audience, discovered this whole garage full of, I think it was Central American, South American footage, just by luck.
other questions or comments? Yes.
I was really interested when you were saying the findings about how the tools and technology that they used really influenced the dance. And so it sounded to me like that you maybe researched a lot. You weren't just looking at the dance, but there's a lot of research that maybe went on about the cultural, just separately from the dance, in order to understand and analyze the dance. So I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about how you prepared yourself to observe. Did you try the dances, or physically attempt them, or just ways that you were preparing yourself to analyze what you were looking at?
Well, in terms of the technology, what we did is, wherever possible, we got examples of the major sort of work patterns in the culture, so that we not only observed the dance, but we observed the work patterns and also social interactions. So we would look at everyday life, whatever footage we could get hold of for the culture, all right? So that was helpful in finding sort of key body uses. Because you'd see, I can remember it was a Spanish dance, I think, where we saw them in the caves with the caskets of wine, and the barrels have to be turned, right? And so you'd see the women go, turn, turn, walking down this long line, turning the barrels, okay? Well, what's this? Above the head? There you have in the dance, all right? So it would be that kind of thing. So the preparation was simply staying open, seeing what you see, and looking at patterns and having the patterns, work on you, basically, rather than we work on that. When we worked on that, it didn't work. When we opened up and let it work on us, then we began to see the patterns.
Adair, did you?
This is, I guess, a follow-up question on that in a way. In terms, I'm just curious about the quantity of films that are part of this collection, and what would you say the percentage is that deals with those work patterns, social interactions, looking at the cultures? If you were focused on dance, I'm assuming that was the bulk of what you were looking at, but how much would you say is the rest of that?
I haven't got the foggiest idea.
Okay. Me neither.
I think maybe Todd would have a better answer. I just don't remember, but I mean, we whenever we could get hold of it, we would look at it. But it's not necessarily in the collection, because we brought stuff in that we looked at that we couldn't collect. I mean, we were limited in what we could afford to collect. And I looked through collections in Europe. I mean, film upon film. I developed bursitis cranking that machinery and looking at footage, all right? So I looked at so much, and I looked at raw footage, so much work, so much social interaction that we never copied and brought in. Okay. So it was just sort of like a memory bank. So what we have, what we don't. Well, it's been 50 years worth. I can't believe it.
Thank you.
Yes.
We have time just for one more comment or question.
I was wondering if studying the oral transmission of these dances and how the people actually transmit it from a generation to another could have helped inform the choreometrics coding system, and if that has been something that Alan Lomax was interested in himself, interviewing people, maybe understanding what's their emphasis, what's they're looking at, or what's they're trying when they're performing themselves.
This would be a very interesting question for someone who's looking within the culture. Cross-culturally, what we did see and what we did look at was, again, everyday movement. How are babies held during the day? Are they on their backs in certain African town villages, right, when the women are working? And you see this, and you see the babies doing this, right? In contrast to certain American Indian tribes where they're in the, what are they called? Yes, the swaddling, you know, in an actual wooden frame so that the baby's like that. Or the Eskimo children where the mother holds the child and bounces them up and down like this. And you see that child collecting their energy into a very clear, strong, one unit gravity position, which is what the men have to do when they go out and wait on the ice in order to get a seal, right? So there's a definite relationship between how children learn. We also did look at some teaching situations, generally in more advanced cultures, all right? But those, we would be looking at the patterns and see how those relate to the dance, rather than the interesting question you're asking about, which is how they think about, all right? That's at the cultural level, yeah. Allegra wants to, but I think Anna has something to say too.
Well, let's, yes, and
if you go into do research, ethnographic research, you can use this knowledge. And I've often tested it out by asking people about things like this. I don't remember any specific examples, but it's very fascinating when they confirm from inside the culture what you're observing from the choreometric or kinemetric point of view. It's a way of sort of testing out these ideas that actually you can do. So
that's important.
Allegra, did you? I mean,
yeah.
I should say things at the end here. No, I was particularly interested, though, in the question. I don't know who it was there. Because what's so exciting here with this is that the verbal level doesn't interfere with the process. It's the body and the movement level, and you see it carried through. I mean, today, just a little bit of watching and seeing the fishermen walking through the water and then seeing that movement it was so exciting to just see that continuity, that correspondence, that ingrained beingness that getting at, really important.
Thank you. This is just the beginning. I'm sorry, maybe you can come up after to ask some questions. I hope you'll, well, there's first of all, a lovely reception here, so we do have some time. And second of all, over the next couple of days, we're going to be moving over to the University of Maryland, and we have both structured sessions, but also there's plenty of time to have more discussions and share ideas. And, you know, just again, picking up on the last question, you know, I think part of remember this is called reimagining, visioning and reimagining. There's also the level of bringing back in what do the voices of the people who are representing the movement think about what they're doing and what they have to say, and to bring some more context back in. So I think it's a very exciting time of mapping a lot of ideas together and possibilities that we have now in this 21st century. So I hope you'll be able to join us over the next few days. Thank you so much for your wonderful memories and insights, Marie Forrestine. Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.